Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Space Pirate series, where today, my friends, hopefully we are going to be taking our happy little pirate bums all the way back into outer space on a brand new and improved ship. But first, I'm afraid that our primate companion Jangles is currently battling the flu. We are currently tending to it, but we'll have to make sure that we keep a close eye. It's going to be a little hard to keep an eye on anything though, because our lights keep going out. Yes indeed, we are once again having power issues, and it is once again my fault, of course, but we're running 4 high-tech research benches. Cut me a little slack here. We're also running them 24/7, and these new windmills should help out with that. But don't look now, because something's falling from the sky. Ah yes, the mighty mech cluster. Something funny about this mech cluster is some way, shape, or form they managed to have sentinels among their ranks. I'm not sure how they managed to override their programming and have them as part of the mech hive, but either way, this ended up causing something of a sentinel civil war, which was very interesting. But this ended up causing the mechs to try and attack the base preemptively, which we weren't exactly ready for. For example, the captain himself was currently experiencing a food binge, meaning that he and his rocket launcher wouldn't be available for this fight, putting us at a pretty big disadvantage, I'll say. Regardless though, the mechanoids were coming right for us, whether we were ready for them or not. We tried to utilize our disruptor pistol as well as the plasma pistols that we had to try and hopefully stun them as much as possible. One of the biggest issues we faced during this battle was the fact that their sentinels could shoot us from a very far distance away, and we only had someone like Sam who could snipe them from a distance. Not to worry though, because it didn't take very long at all for their centipedes to break our lines, causing us to squirm around and just try to kill them as best we could. Thankfully though, I will say that their attention was mostly focused on the gun that was attached to our ship, giving us the advantage here to try and kill them while they tried to destroy it. At the end of the day, we came out victorious with nothing more than a pile of mechanoid corpses and a couple of fires here and there to put out. Our people were pretty injured though, so while they were healing up, we used the ship's defense systems to finish off the remaining bits and bobs of the mech cluster. Now look, I'd be lying to you if I said that mech cluster didn't really suck ass, but nobody died, and also now we have all of these mechanoids and even these sentinels that we can take apart for their precious metals, so, you know, classic space pirate W. As bad luck was tearing apart the sentinels, we actually ended up getting a sentinel beam off of one of them. I'm not sure what the chances are of being able to take that off one of the corpses, but this is the first one that we've seen. We decided to test it out on some of the local wildlife, and I gotta say it's pretty cool because it's basically a never-ending fire rate, but it seems to do some pretty low damage for the most part. Could come in handy for the future though. I also thought maybe I should mention that Jangles the moon monkey here has finally recovered from her flu, and she is feeling right as rain. After that, I also noticed that there was a very large wildfire that had broken out around the starship that crashed in episode 1, the same one that we plan on taking all of the parts and resources from once we have an adequate way of transporting them back here. I mostly just wanted to mention that to remind you that we still have that. Something else that we have is our researchers working literally around the clock at all times on Starflight Basics, which they would inevitably end up completing sometime later. Probably our biggest milestone yet. It is a prerequisite for many other technologies that we need, but also this will now allow us to build ship hull, expanding our ship. With that completed, I'm actually going to put a little bit of focus into researching basic vehicles. It shouldn't take very long at all, but this will allow us to build some things like trucks or something to that effect so that we can actually go deconstruct the fallen starship and haul all of those resources back here. Previously, the vanilla vehicles expanded mods were not part of the mod list, but I have added them if you guys were interested. In preparation for the completion of our research into vehicles, we would end up building a garage. Nothing too fancy, just a little standard wooden shack. In the meantime, the captain would also do a little bit of bartering with some more combat suppliers. That way we could purchase some more stolen UNSC weapons, as well as some of their glistening, powerful armor. This also feels like as good a time as any to mention that these power armors actually also function as EVA suits. We would also begin researching cryosleep caskets, as it is a prerequisite for the ones that we need for the ship. We would then begin working on our garage, finally finishing it, but before we could work on any car parts, we would actually have to start scavenging for some steel, as we were basically bone dry. Thankfully, there were still plenty of steel structures on the map that we could deconstruct, but there was only one last remaining steel vein for us to mine, meaning that from here on out, we're going to have to either get it from the crashed starship or maybe even purchase it. That is, of course, a problem for the future. Right now, we are focused on finishing up plenty of car parts, as well as the extensive research it's going to take before we can actually begin building anything on the ship. And besides, we're not even going to make it to the crashed starship to get any resources if we're murdered by the Knuckle Duster lineup. Our fellow pirates have once again come to try and kill us and steal all our things, and one of them just so happens to be Braden, the lover of gains. Well, I'm afraid that Braden and his pansy-ass compadre pirates are going to be faced with the massive guns of our ship, as well as the smaller guns of all of our pirates very quickly. We rushed out to our defenses to meet these bastards on the battlefield. As you can imagine, our weapons were far superior to the weapons of these scroungy fools, meaning that we had killed the western group quite easily, but we were still heavily outnumbered by the other two remaining groups. If they were smart, all three groups of them would have attacked us all at once, overwhelming our defenses as well as our fellow pirates. But you don't call yourselves the Knuckle Duster lineup if you have any brains. There were a handful of survivors, but of course we wouldn't meet them with mercy, stripping them of their gear before killing them. However, one fella by the name of Howled we would actually tend to before capturing him and taking him prisoner. We wanted him to join us for his planting skill, but we didn't know how useful that would end up being in space, and he doesn't have a good shooting or melee skill or really any other skills, so we enslaved him. That way we could sell him if we wanted to. Quite literally not a second to spare. After the raid ended, we had an infestation in our generator room, which was a little bit of a problem, I'll say. However, thus far, Captain Udo has yet to meet a problem that he couldn't solve with his new rocket launcher, so that's exactly what we used to solve this little problem. We did end up destroying our generators in the process, but to be honest with you, the bugs didn't even get close enough to harm us, so I thought it was a win for sure. I think these rocket launchers might be our greatest purchase yet, as they always level the playing field against any enemy. But now with that little incident behind us, it's time for us to start working on our very first vehicles. We would end up creating 4 separate jet bikes, similar in shape and style to a normal bike, only they're much, much faster. Not only did these bikes look good, but they would also be able to help us out of any pinch if we were to maybe get bogged down with enemies and needed a quick escape route. They would also play a crucial role in purchasing and hauling all of the resources that we need for our ship. Now, they don't really have a very high cargo capacity, so we're going to have to build some other vehicles, but this is a start. We would then actually have official ceremonies that would crown Captain Udo as the pirate captain. That way he could take advantage of the leader abilities, and just as well we would also give Zap Zap the first mate role, which would actually end up giving her the abilities of the moral guide. No reason not to take advantage of these official roles and their abilities if we have the choice. But now we truly begin preparations of resources for our ship, so we're going to begin requesting plenty of bulk goods traders from the Orbital Traders Hub. I also want to briefly mention that because this episode is so focused on us getting the research completed as well as the ship completed, there will be a severe lack of things going on the ground, such as raids and things like that. Not necessarily that they're not going on, just I'm not going to be showing every little bit and bob that happens, unfortunately. I'm sure you all don't mind though. Something I will be showing you, however, is the construction and little mini road of our garage. It's a dog-eat-dog world here on this planet, so we need somewhere at least semi-safe that we can keep our vehicles. But then something miraculous happened. Tiny tried to flirt with Gaines by saying good things about her attitude, and Gaines became quite aroused, and anyhow, the two of them are now deeply in love. Now, Tiny is a high mate, so instinctively this was to be expected, of course, but the miraculous part was Gaines is now pregnant, literally within days. Looks like our pirate crew is going to be growing by one tiny little extra number. I suppose we're going to have to try and get a crib on board. Exciting nonetheless. But cribs cost resources just like everything else that we need on our ship. Luckily, the bulk goods trader is there for us, and we would end up purchasing plenty of resources several times over, but this wasn't exactly working out, you know? I don't want to have to buy these resources every single time, especially not when we have that starship. So if we're going to need to spend our money to get a leg up in this world, quite literally, and get off of this world, we're going to need to do it correctly. So we would actually send out our 4 jet bikes to do a bit of trading with some of the nearby Outlanders. We would end up purchasing purchasing resources from them such as steel and components, and the reason that we're doing this is so that we can build a much better vehicle that can actually carry more cargo from the crash site. Don't get me wrong, I do love our jet bikes, and they are extremely fast and really badass looking, to be fair, but we're still on a pirate planet. It is still extremely dangerous here with the UNSC crawling around, and now the Empire of course hates us, so it would be much better if we had a vehicle that could fly. Allow me to introduce to you the Cabriolet. This bad mamma jamma is reminiscent of cars from the past, and also has the same technology as the jet bikes, just instead of being one attached to the back, there are actually 4 that are pointed at the ground, allowing it to take off in flight. Now that we have this badass vehicle in our arsenal, it's time that we actually go to the crash site and begin collecting resources. You'll notice a huge difference in the amount of time it takes for our Cabriolet to actually get there compared to our jet bikes. It unfortunately can't hold a massive amount of cargo, but it is very fast and thus is going to make this process much quicker. But now comes the tedious part of deconstructing this entire, or at least the vast majority of this crash ship for all that it is worth. The process of which is going to take a very long time, no doubt, so we ended up building a very small camp where we could rest our heads at night and even enjoy some meals together by the fire. Later on into the night, Henry and Ryan would finally arrive on the jet bikes, and this is a true testament to just how fast our aerial vehicle is compared to our land vehicles. They were tired from their long journey, and the captain and Zap Zap were very tired from all the deconstructing all day, so they would rest before waking up in the morning to get up and do it all over again. Now I know what you might be saying though, Rat Knight, how are you going to fuel all of this traveling with all these resources? Well, my friends, the best part about being on a jungle planet, there is plenty of wood that can be converted into chem fuel to fuel our destiny among the stars. And this is part of why I didn't want to show every little thing that ends up happening this episode with Manhunter packs, or even these quests that we end up getting that we're not really taking, because most of this is just boring, tedious work of me loading up these resources into our vehicles and deconstructing the starship and yada yada. I think you get the point. Truly, I think our pirates were just sick of this planet and its inhabitants, and they were more than eager to get off of it and begin doing what they do best: pirating. However, there was one little hiccup in the plan I thought might be worth mentioning. We had a raid from the UNSC. They were dropping all over the starship area, and they were preparing to try and take us down. It would appear that they've become privy to our plans of getting off of this rock, and they intend to stop us. Well, I hate to break it to you, but we don't intend on letting you stop us. You'll never take us alive. The UNSC squad that came to attack us was a bit bigger than we initially thought, as I didn't see all the drop pods that were scattered everywhere. Mostly consisting of Marines and ODSTs, but they once again had a Spartan among their ranks with a big old skewer. We wanted to take the Spartan out first, but unfortunately our rockets weren't super accurate from this range, and even when they were, the shields of the Spartan would stop them from killing them. Our best move here is going to be to try to lure the attackers into the wreckage where we could hide and fight them that way. Think of it something like guerrilla warfare. We've been in this wreckage for a very long time, and we know it like the back of our hands, having to take it apart and whatnot, so we kinda had a home field advantage. The attackers began to flee, even the Spartan, who knew that they would be overwhelmed by a 4-on-1 situation. They got away, but the Marines wouldn't be so lucky. I did, however, notice that during the battle there was a little bit of an oopsie daisy. As you can see with Henry, some of these injuries are from our own rocket launcher. It would seem the sun of this planet was interfering with the targeting system of the rocket launcher. Either that or the captain had his eyes closed, one or the other. A bit of time later, we had finally collected enough resources and brought back home that I felt comfortable deconstructing the front portion of our ship so we could finally get started on extending it. The process of which, yes, you guessed it, is going to take a very long time, but we'll get there, no worries. And I want to say thank you to you guys, because I'm not completely familiar with Save Our Ship 2, and a lot of you guys were telling me that I should save up resources ahead of time, which is actually something I didn't do, and at least not do all that well, and so this wouldn't have taken near as long or been as tedious if I would have done that. So thank you, but sorry. Luckily it wasn't too big of a deal either, since our little speed racer here could actually literally make several trips back and forth per day. Probably the longest part was just loading it up each time, I'd say. Naturally though, it would help that we had a pretty big stash of silver saved up so that we could try and buy things from the bulk goods traders. The biggest issue that we were having was trying to get the steel here from the wreckage, as it was actually much heavier than plasteel. So we mostly relied on traders for that and our components, and we also purchased a spare EVA helmet just for the hell of it, in case we need it. Finally, we would begin working on the interior of the ship. I had hoped that it would be much bigger than this, but I guess I had sorely underestimated the cost of building onto it like this. Nonetheless, when it's all said and done, we'll have enough quarters for our crew, as well as a storage area, a kitchen, and also a cryo sleep bay for all of our pirates. However, construction would have to be halted for a brief moment as Gaines went into labor finally. Hours upon hours of excruciating pain, but it was worth it. A beautiful baby girl. However, the poor little baby was born sick, but she would be fine. She's a fighter. She is a pirate after all. I mean, her mother was an elite ODST who is one of the most badass fighters of the UNSC, so this baby's probably stronger than most people after being a few hours old. Besides, the ship doctor, Ryan, will take good care of all her medical needs, and I'm sure Auntie Zap Zap wouldn't mind chipping in here and there. The captain would ensure that there were specific blueprints for a cryo sleep crib for our newest member, as well as a critter sleep casket for Jangles the moon monkey. We always take care of our own around here. But finally though, the first expansion of our ship is completed. We do need to still paint it and get it in line with this black and red theme that we have going on, but first we're going to try to expand it a little bit more by digging through the mountain and adding on to the tip of it there. First things first though, we're going to have to head back to the starship wreckage and gather up on more resources. First, we need to try and get a bigger storage room. I would also like to have a bigger freezer for our food, and possibly even, hear me out on this, a hydroponics basin so we don't starve to death in space. So much to do and so little steel to do it with, but first, looks like we have a raid from the UNSC once more. These bastards are really hammering home on us this episode. It looks like they're falling in transport pods all around our territory. Initially, it didn't seem like there were actually all that many of them, especially on our western side, but on the eastern side, they were crawling all over the place, and there were plenty more to come. Our defenses wouldn't stand even a fraction of a chance with this much firepower. This was no longer an attempt to hinder our process. This was scorched earth. They were trying to totally shut us down. We were completely outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched. We had all fled to the ship for safety, but as we were doing so, Jangles would get scared by all the gunfire and begin running away towards the enemy. We had came under extreme fire, and there was no way for anyone to go out and try to rescue Jangles. We were completely pinned down by the enemy. They continued to advance on the ship, inching closer and closer every moment. Our defenses had completely failed, and even the guns of our ship were taking a lot of damage. We wouldn't be able to hold out like this for much longer. We had to figure out something, anything. We had an idea, but it was a last-ditch effort, and it would unfortunately mean that we would have to sacrifice our good friend Jangles the moon monkey. I'm afraid at this point though, it's Jangles' life or ours though. With a heavy heart, we would have to launch the ship, and with that we would leave this wretched rock. Well, it looks like we made it. We actually did it. And we're all completely safe. That wasn't exactly the launch we were looking for at all, but I suppose at the very least, none of our humanoid crew members were injured or dead. Jangles' memory will always live on through every single member of our crew, and our merciless crusades throughout the cosmos. The name Jangles the moon monkey shall echo on for an eternity. We fought so hard to get into space, but now the question remains, what do we do now? We do what we do best. murder, rob, and plunder. First though, we're going to need some time to kind of relax and cool off a little bit. We almost died in a huge UNSC attack against us, so I mean, you know, our nerves are still a little bit shot at the moment. Some rec time in the old holodeck would make us feel better though. Shame it's the only recreation item we could get on board before we had to leave though. After getting our bearings back about us though, a quick scan of the ship actually showed that our defenses were offline. Perplexed by this, we were beginning to wonder what had happened. It would appear that the UNSC completely destroyed both of our gun turrets, leaving us very vulnerable to attacks. Though we had managed to bring quite a few of our resources with us, so it shouldn't take long before we can build new gun turrets. I didn't have a chance to mention earlier either though, we had actually brought our jet car along with us. Now we did have to seal up the garage door as it doesn't function as an airlock, so if we ever want to get it out, we'll have to deconstruct some of the hull. Speaking of construction though, we would end up building a radio terminal on the ship. That way we can actually communicate with other factions, and the captain could also call the orbital traders hub once that's possible again. It's going to be a little while, looks like. Which is actually quite a shame, because as the captain went outside to begin clearing up the resources like plasteel and normal steel that were around the old gun turrets, I realized that we needed more advanced components before we could replace them, and we're going to have to trade for those, as we can't exactly just make them, due to our limited resources, of course. Now, something that we did have plenty of loaded up into the ship before we left was dye, so we would actually begin painting the exterior and the interior of the ship, minus the flooring, at least for now. I will say I was pretty happy with how the ship was looking though after we painted it, though I am still pretty disappointed that we didn't have an opportunity to expand it further. That is something that we can actually do from space, assuming everyone has the proper attire on so that their organs aren't sucked out through their spacesuit or just froze, you know, to death. Before today's episode ends though, I am going to be renaming Bulwark. I asked for names last episode, and I actually received the wonderful name of Porkins from our good friend Rex705 Gaming, who says that this would be a good pig pun. Not only that, but I believe it's also a Star Wars reference, if I'm not mistaken. And before we go today, we do have a bit of lore from our good friend AtkinsEyeball5093. Sorry if I butchered your name, but you suggested the lore that Udo got his nickname from eating a plant for a bet called an Udo fruit that tends to cause rapid hemorrhages. Luckily, the fruit was rotten, giving him only a mild tummy ache. Zap Zap got her nickname from, well, she does the Zap Zap. I absolutely love this. I especially love that the captain's is very specific and, a very detailed lore, while Zap Zap's just, it just kind of makes sense. Remember, if you guys have any lore or ideas or anything really that you would like to see added to the series, be sure to let me know in the comment section down below. Don't be shy, especially with the lore. If you want to provide that and kind of try to make these characters your own, as well as our own, I suppose, feel free to. I apologize for a little bit of a shorter episode today and a little bit of a time crunch, to be honest with you, but also we've done a lot this episode and we finally made it back into space, so I'm pretty content with that. But I love you guys ever so much. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.